Friends, I never thought that I'd have to perform this particular role. But time and reality can be very cruel sometimes. And perhaps you have to move ahead, confronting this cruel reality. Could I, on behalf of the organizers, the Indian International Center, Professor Zoya Hassan, and other friends of late Mushirul Hasan, sincerely welcome you to this lecture session. We are indeed grateful to Sri Gopakrishna Gandhi for kindly consenting to deliver the first Mushirul Hasan Memorial Lecture on a theme which is not only challenging, but is increasingly becoming relevant for contemporary India. Sri Gandhi, the grandson of the father of our nation, is retired IAS officer and diplomat, and was the governor of West Bengal from 2004 to 2009. Currently, he is a distinguished professor at Ashoka University. For me, it is indeed a privilege, personal privilege, to have the opportunity of welcoming Sri Gopakrishna Gandhi, because initially as a Pro-Vice Chancellor and subsequently as a Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University, I had the opportunity to work under his chancellorship. When I learned the urgency of striking a balance between the pursuit of academic excellence and cooperative academic governance, which I'm sure the House will agree is the need of the hour for any university in this country. We enthusiastically await his address, which I'm sure, as is always the case, be both stimulating and rewarding. We are also extremely grateful to Mr. N. Vohra for kindly agreeing to chair the session. Like Mr. Gandhi, Mr. Vohra is also a former IAS officer, and he had been the 12th governor of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. Currently, he is the president of the Indian International Center, which is hosting this program. We sincerely welcome Mr. Vohra among us and do look forward to what will surely be his stimulating intervention. Could I now request Mr. Vohra and Mr. Gandhi to come to the dais, and may I request Professor Asus and Habib to kindly escort them to the dais. Friends, on the occasion of the first Mushirul Hasan Memorial Lecture, a volume entitled Mushirul Hasan, An Intellectual and Institutional Journey will be released. It has been edited by me and my distinguished colleague, Professor Hari Vasudevan, who, because of other preoccupation, is unable to be present today. It has been published by the Primer's Book of New Delhi. Surely it will be easy to find errors of omissions in the present exercise, but we hope to be excused because the publication had to be undertaken within a very short period of time. The book begins with Mushir's own recollection of his Aligarh years, his sectional presidential address to the Indian History Congress on partition narratives, and his unpublished 2014 lecture on Jawaharlal Nehru, which I'm sure will be extremely relevant today. It then brings together essays by leading scholars who capture how Mushir shaped himself both as a pioneering historian and a passionate institution builder of his time, as well as personal reminiscences of Mushir by his close associates to record the attainments of someone that deserved to be captured, not only for his contemporaries, but for future generations. We, the editors of the collection, express our deep gratitude to the contributors and thank the editors of journals, newspapers, and e-publications to permit the reproductions of some of the articles and tributes on Mushir. However, this volume would not have seen the light of the day without the personal intervention of Mushir's life partner, Professor Zoya Hasan, and the unstinted support we received from Mr. Bhola Barma and his colleagues at Primus Books, especially Shugandha Gupta and Mr. Sukla. Primus Books mobilized all its resources to publish the collection within an incredibly short time, which can only be explained by the emotion and reverence that our friend Mushir inspired. Friends, I'm reminded here of a Partisan comment, and I quote, "The final test of a leader is that he or she leaves behind others the conviction and the will to carry on," unquote. Surely, Mushir was such a person. But for me, and the co-editor of the volume, which will be released today, Mushir, apart from being a fellow historian, was a true friend and well-wisher. We celebrated with him our moments of joy, but he also lent us his shoulder to lean on at times of our distress. Mushir's death has created a void in my life which will never be fulfilled. But working on this volume provided me with an opportunity to refresh my fond memories of my colleague, which I shall cherish all my life. As has been aptly remarked, I quote, "Many people will walk in and out of your life, but only true friends will leave footprints in your heart," unquote. And surely this is true for Mushir's relationship with those present here. With these words, can I once again welcome you to all to the first Mushirul Hasan Memorial Lecture and request Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Vohra to release the volume Mushirul Hasan, An Intellectual and Institutional Journey. Could I also request Mr. Gopakrishna Gandhi to present the first copy of the book to Professor Zoya Hasan. Zoya, please. The book is exhibited outside the hall. You can fill in the order form to get a copy of the book. Of course, the contributors will be receiving the complimentary copies shortly. May I now take the opportunity of requesting Mr. Vohra to kindly conduct the proceedings of the day. Mr. Vohra, sir.
Mr. Gopal Gandhi, Vice Chancellor Professor Das, Professor Zoya Hasan, members of Professor Mushirul Hasan's family, all the eminent invited guests here this evening. Kindly excuse me, I have a bad cold. For me personally, it is not merely a question of collaborating with Professor Zoya Hasan to organize this event this evening in memory of my old friend Mushirul Hasan. I had got to know him, if I may say so, rather well during the fairly long period that I served this institution as director. At a given point of time during this long period, he was the Vice Chancellor. Earlier, he was the head of Department of History and Culture, if I'm not mistaken. And we had a lot of interaction, during which period I had got him to visit us time and again to participate in discussions, to chair discussions on varied subjects, varied issues relating to our polity, our society, the problems facing the governments of the day, and so on. But what really brought him, or brought me very close to him, was his interest as a historian, as an eminent second-generation historian, in issues relating to the consequences of partition of India. And if I'm not wrong, it was about that time, besides his own writing, which is copious, that we in the IIC brought out, if I may again make this claim, a very valuable issue of the IIC Quarterly on the partition, on the Great Divide. In this very hall, I forget the date now, he spoke to us for more than an hour, and the session lasted 3 hours. I don't know whether Zoyaji had found time to come from JNU that time. Was on the Kasbahs of colonial Awadh, which book he had brought out early years of this century. The life in the kothas, the kothis, the imambadas, and the society, and the food, the cuisine, the politics, the decision-making systems, and what loss had been suffered by the disappearance of these kasbahs over a period of time. He wrote copiously on communalism. He was a modern historian of great worth. And even after he finished with his academic career and he was asked to steer the affairs of the National Archives, he was Director General of National Archives. I had then moved on to Kashmir. I had occasion to have several discussions with him. The book that has been released today, I have still to see, but it's a great tribute, and I would congratulate Professor Das for having put it together, because this would be a good way of remembering Mushir Sahib. I would not say very much more, because we have gathered here this evening to hear my good colleague and friend, Gopal Gandhi. We have been colleagues at several junctures in our respective careers. Of course, he's much younger than me, and I have the advantage of being here and there when he was here and there. But he has served abroad in various countries, South Africa, Lesotho, United Kingdom, Norway, and so on. He's a scholar, a man of literature. When somebody asked me once to describe Gopal in one sentence, I said he's a pedigree nationalist of third generation. We've been together colleagues as governors. He left soon after because he was much senior to me as a governor, though younger than me in age. But he has not wasted a day in his life. He's now a distinguished academic in the Ashoka University. He teaches history, ancient history, culture, civilization. And if I were young enough and mobile enough, I would happily travel to Sonipat to hear his talks. So this evening, we will hear him first Mushirul Hasan Memorial Lecture, and I'd welcome Gopal Gandhi and request him to please address us. Mr. Gopal Gandhi.
Esteemed Shri Vohra, Professor Shoranjan Das, Zoya Sahiba, other members of Mushir Sahib's family present in the audience, esteemed Hamid Sahab, former Vice President of India, friends. The title of this lecture is Freedom and Sons Limited, the enterprise of free speech in a market of controls. As the title suggests, it is about dissent, the right to dissent, the freedom to be different, the freedom to be oneself, and to do so in an atmosphere of controls from the organizations of society and the institutions of state, and do so without fear. But no right comes without some difficulties. And sure enough, as I began working on the text of this lecture, the difficulty came to me in the shape of a hallucinated conversation with my late brother, Professor Ramchandra Gandhi, Ramu as he was popularly known. He comes in this vision with furrowed brows and tells me, I am here to express dissent from your dissent. Strong disagreement over the title of your lecture. And then he says in his inimitable mix of Hindi, Tamil and English, मैंने तुम्हारे फर्स्ट मुशीरुल हसन लेक्चर के टाइटल फ्रीडम एंड सन्स लिमिटेड के बारे में कुछ सोचा है, लेकिन ये फ्रीडम एंड सन्स लिमिटेड, ये सन्स जो है इल्ले गोपू, కొంచెం politically incorrect. Not కొంచెం sensitive, insensitive, gender insensitive, ரொம்ப gender insensitive. It could have passed muster some 20, 30 years ago, but not today, certainly not in the IIC where Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay's spirit is alive, where Durgabai Deshmukh peers over her husband's shoulders to see everything is happening all right, and the audience may include Devaki Jain and Kapila Vatsyayan. The title obscures, he says. The title Freedom and Sons obscures. In fact, it nullifies the roles of India's daughters, from Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi and Begum Hazrat Mahal of Awadh to Madame Kama and Annie Besant. And don't forget Kasturba Gandhi, who died in a Raj prison, and Maulana Azad's wife Zulekha Begum, who died in Kolkata while Maulana Sahib was in the Ahmednagar Fort prison. And he would not seek parole. And then Ramu continues, no less than any of these, no less than the women who stood for freedom from the white man's domination, all the women who stood for freedom from our own male-controlled society, like Mirabai, who broke out of the court and palace to public spaces singing of Krishna, the great emancipator, and M.S. Subbulakshmi, who broke out of the Carnatic Kacheri's strict repertory to sing Mirabai's songs of Krishna. I listened to this long admonition from my brother in silent awe. But then he was to continue the reverie. Ramu said, Subbulakshmi's husband was a khadi-wearing freedom fighter and jail-goer. But merely because she wore Kanjivaram silks and flowers, don't think that she was not a fighter for freedom. She was a fighter for freedom from social shackles. She stormed the male-dominated Bajrangi bastion by giving us the most popular and by far the most passionate rendering of the Hanuman Chalisa. Can anyone sing Jai 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 Hanuman Gosai like that daughter of Madurai? She who did not touch politics' hem, who had never read the Constitution of India, who did not know the phrase gender equality, has done no less than any politician, lawyer or engineer to take forward Sardar Patel's unification of India by singing in Braj Bhasha in Madras, Tamil in Bombay, Malayalam in Calcutta, Guru Nanak's compositions in Hyderabad with the same rapturous intensity as any Kirtana of Tyagaraja. Subbulakshmi, and don't forget Begum Akhtar, who overcame great restrictions on her public concerts to come back by sheer perseverance, to return and to sing Kush tu duniya ki hinayat ne aur kush talkhiye halat ne. Gopu, Subbulakshmi and Akhtari Bai should be co-chair of that firm, Freedom and Sons Limited. Only it can't be called that. Change the title. Younger brothers are notorious for taking elder brothers and elder sisters' blessings, but rarely their advice. So I told him in that hallucinated conversation that by freedom and sons, I mean the progeny, the daughters and sons of our freedom struggle, of our freedom, that I really mean us. And I stayed with the title for this first Mushirul Hasan Memorial Lecture, which is an honor to be asked to give and a challenge to be expected to take. Mushir Sahab was something else. In his thinking, something else. In the expression of that thought, something else. He was that in what he did as well, and the way he did what he did. Very consistently and very typically, he asserted his inalienable right to be a contrarian. He thrived in debate. He would, of course, correct that at once and say, debating thrived in him. Working in and heading institutions, Mushir Sahab saved some of them from mediocrity and rescued others from mendacity. A professorship in history is in some senses the equivalent of the penultimate ashramic stage of Vanaprastha, forest dwelling. Just like a professorship in philosophy is the equivalent of sannyas. Mushir Sahab thought and acted otherwise. Teaching history and culture at the Jamia Millia Islamia saw him take a position on the banning of books in India or elsewhere, or anywhere. He had his own assessment of the satanic verses, but he was opposed, he said, in principle, to a free country like India banning books, curbing free thought and expression. Creative writing for Mushir Sahab was an enterprise in freedom as much as it was in art, and had to be free of controls. Faiz Ahmad Sahab, as we all think of him, has spoken of Tere Ilzam. He has spoken of Sange Dushnam. Mushir Sahab faced vilification, persecution, unpopularity as a consequence. And in the defense of the freedom against the missiles of intolerance, Mushir Sahab again became something else. Archives in India particularly, are taken to be made of cobwebs and dust. Being posted to the directorship of archives is akin to what in medieval times was being sent off to the viceroyalty of the Deccan, a punishment posting, to something that is poorly funded, poorly guarded, poorly understood. Mushir Sahab's helming of the National Archives of India quickly demonstrated that aging documents and yellowing books are not dead. They can think, they can breathe, they can speak up. Two examples. The first comes from Dadabhai Nauroji, mentor to both M.K. Gandhi and M.A. Jinnah. Neither Hindu nor Muslim, but a brilliant specimen of India's smallest and brilliant minority, the Parsi. He was to preside over the Indian National Congress twice and be hailed as the grand old man of India's freedom struggle. Nauroji founded in Bombay the Anglo-Gujarati paper speaking for and speaking to the Parsi called the Rast Goftar. Keki Darwala may correct my pronunciation of it. Rast Goftar meant truth teller. I do not know how many newspapers today caught in the tentacles of advertisement revenue and slaves to advertisement revenue necessarily because they have to survive, can call themselves Rast Goftar, truth teller. But that is what his journal was. Moving to London, Nauroji became the first Indian in 1892 to be elected to the House of Commons. And when he won his Finsbury Central seat to the House of Commons by just 5 votes, Nauroji came to be called narrow majority. The Liberal Party loved that. Now, friends, we have for a long time in India, from the beginning of our constitution, from the beginning of our assemblies and legislatures and parliament, have had 2 seats reserved for nomination to parliament for the Anglo-Indian community. Now, true, Anglo-Indian community were, in purely demographic terms, in terms of electoral suffrage, not likely to elect members from its own community to parliament. But look at the vision of our founders. They said that the Anglo-Indian community must be represented in parliament. They have to be given a say. They have to be given voice. So it was not just the Anglo-Indian community. It was a recognition of the slightest, thinnest sliver of our population being given a position of equality in the Parliament of India. Now that provision is being done away with by a constitutional amendment. Narrow majority Nauroji would be dismayed to see that. We can look back nostalgically to him and lament the loss of the broad vision that gave, not took away, confidences from narrow slices of population. That amazing man, Nauroji, has left a frail trail of papers, some of which are in the National Archives. Dinyar Patel, who is working on a biography of Nauroji, tells me that when he found that staff in the private papers division of the National Archives were not always able to find or locate the exact papers that he wanted, he went to Mushir Sahib and told him of this problem. And Mushir Sahib said something to him which was unexpected and unusual, but original. He said, Dinyar, you go to the storage room and you look out for them and you find them. And if you find some of them are damaged, you tell me, we will have them restored. The second example relates to M.K. Gandhi's colleague of another narrow majority in South Africa, the German Jewish descended Herman Kallenbach, who worked with others to strengthen the self-confidence of Indian South Africans fighting for the political rights of their own minority community. The Satyagraha was massive and wholly non-violent, leading Nelson Mandela, decades later, to say that Gandhi it was who gave the African National Congress a sense of a mass disciplined protest. All 3 words important: mass, disciplined, and protest. Now, Kallenbach was integral to that Satyagraha. Letters between Kallenbach and Gandhi were in the Kallenbach family's keep, oscillating between the needs of history and those of natural heirs. Mushir Sahib stepped in decisively to assist the government of India acquire those papers from their private holdings. And the creative energies of those 2 men thus stepped out of the sealed vault of time. Mushir Sahib did this not because his thought was markedly aligned to Gandhi's or to those who let themselves to be called Gandhians. This is because he wanted archival facts, not fiction, to tell the truth, to be Rast Goftar. And because he had a sense of the history of freedom functioning within conditions of control and overcoming domination and suppression, not just from an insecure state, but from an intolerant society. Why Mushir Sahib left the archives when he did, I will never understand. His presence in that position was perhaps too good to be true. गाइड जो फिल्म है, गाइड फिल्म में शैलेंद्र के अल्फाज को एस.डी. बर्मन ने गाया है। तूने तो सबको राह बताई, तू अपनी मंजिल क्यों भूला, औरों की उलझन सुलझा के राजा कच्चे धागों में झूला, तू क्यों कच्चे धागों में झूला. Friends, as Ganesh Devi and Pradeep Hanjubon have reminded us, we have very endangered indigenous languages. Languages which we speak, our parents speak, our grandparents speak, are perfectly safe. Languages which we don't speak, our parents speak, are endangered. Which we don't speak, our parents don't speak, our grandparents alone speak, are critically endangered. Those which nobody speaks among these three tiers are extinct. We have to protect them. But there is one language which I will not call indigenous, because the indigenous language term is a sacred term, but it is one of our chosen languages. It is completely unendangered. It is thriving. It is called backbiting. Mushir Sahab was given an ultimate compliment in that language. He was dubbed left liberal. Mushir Sahab, being who he was, he wore that description as a badge. But again, being who he was, he wore it upside down to make light of both the description and the describers and himself. जो समाज औरों पर हंसी करता है, उस समाज के बारे में हम क्या कहें? जो समाज खुद पर हंस सकता है, वो समाज बहुत ऊंचा है. हम खुद पर हंसने की तबीयत भूल चुके हैं. The left liberals is a very lonely space. शैलेंद्र का एक और कमाल है, इस बार मुकेश की आवाज़ में. Celebrating that free to roam everywhere and be pinned to nowhere condition, the condition of true independence. हम सब जानते हैं उसको. You will complete it before I even say the first two words. मेरा जूता है जापानी, ये पतलून इंग्लिस्तानी, सर पे लाल टोपी रूसी, फिर भी दिल है हिंदुस्तानी. Lonely, I said. Lonely but not safe. Those who remember the footage will recall that as Raj Kapoor traipses singing away on that serpentine road, a snake actually crawls up towards him, seeing which Raj Kapoor simply flees. The state, whether inclined left, right, liberal or tyrannous, has little use for and less patience with the left liberal. This fate, of course, befalls not just the left liberal, but just about anyone who values the freedom to agree, to disagree, assent or dissent, concur or demur, to say I disagree, and to do that in complete fearlessness. And she or he then becomes at once a stakeholder in freedom and Sons Ltd. The great transactions for our freedom, colonial rule, have been described as battles. The historic year in 1857 as a war, and then as a struggle and as movements of non-cooperation, civil disobedience, and the most iconic, Quit India. They were that. Seen in the vocabulary of our age, I submit that they can also be seen at a certain allegorical levels in terms of an enterprise in which capital, intellectual, emotional, and material was generated. Look at the intellectual capital which this struggle generated. In terms of just newspapers, you have to just consider the titles of the newspapers. Navajivan, Young India, Tribune, Independent, Pioneer, Leader, Swadeshamitran, Kesari, Veera Kesari, all of them engendering enormous self-confidence, and all from within the market of controls. And then we have books, starting with Nauroji's own great and almost iconic work, in which he converted a noun into an adjective. Poverty and un-British rule, telling the British that your word, your name, British, is actually a great adjective, a quality. You are being un-British in India. And then Gandhi's Hind Swaraj, Nehru's discovery of India. These were intellectual capital creations and emotional capital. Vande Mataram, the great song. Bharati's enormous contributions in terms of his poetry, Sarala Devi's songs, all of them emotional capital. And curiously enough, Freedom and Sons Limited had this tremendous manufacturing line, material capital. Can you imagine, from the north, the south, east and west, khadi being spun and created like a vast disembodied textile machine, all being controlled by Freedom and Sons Limited, in an extraordinarily creative exercise of controlled decontrol. And then another side, one-off material capital, salt. Freedom and Sons was indeed an enterprise of extraordinary dimensions, with 2 R&D centers, Sabarmati and Sevagram. Dividends declared in terms of opportunities for national service through the organization as well as through participation in elections. All this while a strict system of controls operated by the British Raj kept its activities under close and often the harshest mechanisms of control. You'll jail me? All right. You think I can't spin? Can I not spin in jail? You can. And so the machine never stopped. Material capital never stopped being created. Freedom and Sons did not close operations on India becoming independent or giving itself in 1950s great new articles of association in the shape of the Constitution of India. It floated a new series of bonds in terms of political rights and duties. Freedom and Sons Limited stands, therefore, for the integrated will of the Constituent Assembly of 299, its ethos, its conscience. It is, in fact, those 299, including 15 women, in the shape of its legacy that we, the people of India, that Assembly's legatees are trustees and beneficiaries of. We see that freedom today seriously compromised by 3 major factors: the role of religion in politics, the role of money in politics, and the role which political power, legitimately derived, democratically received, plays in ways that befuddle the laws and bewilder democracy. If our Constituent Assembly meeting in its last session on 24th January 1950, comprising 299 members, had been placed in a time machine and zoomed forward to our times and been shown the concept of the National Register of Citizens and the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, it would have gasped in astonished disbelief. To determine nationhood from which citizenship flows on the basis of religion, the 299 would have said, is what the imposition in medieval times of the jizya did, and which in modern times was to lead to the ideology of 2 nations that led to partition. The legality and constitutionality of the CAA is now being challenged before the Supreme Court of India, and we may trust it to render justice. But the issue raises the questions which goes beyond the legality and the case. Has religion tightened its hold on us as a people? And simultaneously has freedom in all its aspects loosened its appeal to us? If the nation today, our beloved nation, our India, was asked collectively, do you want a new temple or a free press? I am not sure that the majority would opt to reading strong editorials over the chance to worship at a new altar. If one were to go by the visible external accoutrements of religion on the persons of individuals and in places of work, in cars, on the surfaces of public transport, with the backs of 3-wheelers leading the way, the number of mosques and temples being built across the country, one would say it is undeniable that in the last 50 years or so, religious self-identification has become more pronounced than it used to be, as has religious intolerance and bigotry. In our secular polity, the Republic was meant to be and attempted to be a sanctuary for those anxious, fearful in their minority status, afraid of being bullied into subordination. Bahujana Hitaya, Bahujana Sukhaya, right. And we have to treat that as sacred. But beyond that, Bahujana Hitaya, Bahujana Sukha is our democracy. But beyond that, Sarva Lokashrayaya Lokanukampaya is our republic. And that is why we are a democratic republic. Not just a democracy, but a democratic republic. Borrowing its symbols from Emperor Ashoka, who declared, Save Manuse Mama Praja. Save Manuse Mama Praja. In Magadhi Prakrit says Ashoka in the Kalinga Edict 1, all my subjects are my children. All my subjects are my children. The Republic of India made all equal in freedom and free in equality. Without going into the legality again of the case, I just want to ask myself and everyone else, is there anything that can be as eroding of freedom as the fear of losing that confidence in Save Manuse Mama Praja? Friends, there was among many unafraid daughters and sons of the freedom struggle, standing tall among them, Badshah Khan, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, Frontier Gandhi as he was called. A great title because it gave him a GPS, the Northwest Frontier Province, but it also placed him at the outermost frontier of courage against bigotry. Frontier Gandhi. He strove along with his alter ego. Frontier Gandhi is called Gandhi's alter ego. But in reality, it was the other way around. Gandhi was his alter ego. He strove with Gandhi to protect Hindus from massacre in Noakhali, to protect Muslims from massacre in Bihar, strove against the two nations theory against partition, caused the Northwestern Frontier Province to vote against the idea of Pakistan, was jailed and virtually exiled. Frontier Gandhi lies buried in Jalalabad in Afghanistan. By the provisions of the CAA, that Frontier Gandhi, albeit a recipient of the Bharat Ratna, would be barred from the kindness of the citizenship of India. As would his descendants and the descendants of his descendants, freedom's daughters and sons, should they be located in Afghanistan or Pakistan. Why? To what purpose? And while at the same time, thousands in Bangladesh are offered a welcoming door into neighboring India, which means our northeast and east, already in the most inelastic land-man ratio, find their economic and cultural freedoms reach breaking point. And to spare a thought for those this act is said to have been made, जिन लोगों के खातिर CAA हमें बतलाया जा रहा है, बनाया गया है, those facing religious persecution in Afghanistan, Pakistan and Bangladesh, उन पर इस कानून का क्या असर पड़ेगा जो कि वहाँ हैं? किस तरह उन पर दबाव पड़ सकते हैं? Political, emotional, economic, ethnic. किस तरह? And turning our thoughts back to India, इसका असर हिंद के मुसलमानों के दिल और दिमाग पर क्या होगा? हम सब हमारी आज़ादी की औलाद हैं. हम अलग अलग मज़हबों, कौमों और ज़ुबानों के हैं, मगर हमारी आज़ादी एक है. The CAA's legality being constitutionally challenged, we must trust it, the Supreme Court, to address these issues in the light of the laws and the Constitution of India. Next to bigotry, in its capacity to threaten and whittle freedom down, is the capacity, the power of money. Freedom and Sons Ltd had to have its assets and liability of faith divided in 1947 and then again in 1971. Today its holdings are a truncated residue of its earlier original asset. It sought the greatest impact with the highest investment of intellectual energy, intense personal commitment, but with the most modest expenditure budget. This was not because the freedom movement was short of funds, but because it knew the value of money raised through donations from some rich but many not so rich, and in fact many times that number not rich at all. Gandhi, of course, was its biggest fundraiser, raiser of what is now called crowdfunding. कितने लोग जुड़ाए हैं उस इंसान ने. कोई मीडिया एडवाइज़र नहीं उनके पास, कोई पब्लिसिटी एजेंट नहीं, प्लाज्मा स्क्रीन करके कोई चीज़ नहीं. किस तरह उन्होंने प्रचार किया, कहाँ कहाँ जाकर. ये तिलक स्वराज फंड कोई भी 4 आने से कम नहीं देगा और कोई भी 2 रुपये से ज़्यादा नहीं देगा. 1 करोड़ रुपए जमे. Each paisa accounted for, audited as well, with J.C. Kumarappa sending an audit objection to Gandhi himself for having charged some food bill of his party to the fund. One man foresaw with laser-like precision and uncanny foresight the danger that would face free India. Rajagopalachari wrote in a diary he maintained while in Vellore jail in 1920-21. We all ought to know, these are Rajaji's words, we all ought to know that Swaraj will not at once, or I think even for a long time to come, be better government or greater happiness for the people. Elections and their corruptions, injustice and the power and tyranny of wealth, and inefficiency of administration will make a hell of life as soon as freedom is given to us. These are Rajaji's words. Rajaji, who has translated, interpreted the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Tirukural, written on Kamba Ramayana, has allowed himself to use here what can be called slang. Hell of life. Can you imagine the extent of his anxiety? Believe it or not, this was written 25 years before independence. पर कुछ ईमानदार चुनाव हुए भी हैं इसके बाद. But now, elections have come by definition to mean the infusing of candidature with cash. One feels like saying, hell of a life. The weaker the candidate, the stronger the cash. The fizz of money, white, black and grey, pervades the election air. Candidacy has come to be regarded as an investment. The candidate who wins, of course wins, but the candidate who loses also wins cash. In 1957, in the high noon of the Nehru era, Tata Iron and Steel Company wanted to change their memoranda of association in order to allow the company to make contributions to political parties, which meant basically to the Indian National Congress. Did the great Tatas need Congress's patronage? Did Nehru's Congress need Tata's money? Anybody's guess. The matter went to court. The great judge, Justice M.C. Chagla, with Justice S.T. Desai, going entirely by legal yardsticks, ruled in the Bombay High Court, allowing the change. Yes, you can contribute, but with a very weighty obiter. Their comments are memorable. Chagla and Desai said, "Before parting with this case, we think it our duty to draw the attention of Parliament to the great danger inherent in permitting companies to make contributions to the funds of political parties. It is a danger which may grow apace and which may ultimately overwhelm and even throttle democracy in this country. Therefore, it is desirable for Parliament to consider under what circumstances and under what limitations companies should be permitted to make these contributions." When a new Companies Act was enacted in 2013, this provision was kept, the provision for contributions was kept more or less intact and found reflection in Section 182. The only significant change being an enhancement of the erstwhile limit of 5% to 7.5% of the average of the net profit made during the 3 preceding financial years. And so as the law stands at present, a political party may receive contributions subject to certain limitations prescribed by the Act. by an independent encouragement for corporate funding, Section 77 of the Representation of the People's Act excludes expenditure incurred by political parties from the computation of the ceiling on an election commission prescribed candidate. What does this mean? There is a Hindi saying, "Hathi ke paam mein sabke paam." So when the companies are officially permitted to contribute in this scale, the doors are open and vast sums get flung into the election havan, both from within and outside the provisions of the Companies Act. And this is where black money mingles with the white, making the whole thing as grey as stubble-burned smog. Once elected with the help of another's money, be it an individual's or a company's, the victorious candidate can just not look the donor in the eye and say no when that donor asks for an inappropriate concession. The present funding arrangement, as I said, has one other effect. It puts independent candidates at a disadvantage. Independents cannot receive this money. Independent MPs and independent-minded MPs are, of course, a rarity now. There was a time when independent MPs were a factor. Many of you in this audience will remember their names. In the first general elections, 1952, 36 independents won, the highest so far. This time, last time, in our present Lok Sabha, there are only 4 independents. Almost all of them backed by a major party for the reason that another party had denied the candidate a ticket. This is not said in criticism, just factual. But this is not how it used to be. Independent MPs came from constituencies all over the country, including persons like Acharya Kriplani, whose home province, Sindh, had vanished from the map of India, but he was in parliament. Harindranath Chattopadhyay, Sarojini Devi's gifted brother from Vijayawada. M.S. Ane, the distinguished disciple of Lokmanya Tilak from Nagpur. S.M. Banerjee, the independent Marxist and trade unionist from Kanpur. V.K. Krishnamenon, elected as such twice, first from Midnapur in West Bengal, after the INC denied him a ticket, and then from Trivandrum. The then still left-leaning M.R. Masani from Ranchi. N.C. Chatterjee, the Hindu Mahasabhaite, father of a future large Lok Sabha speaker, Somnath Chatterjee from Burdwan. Annie Mascarin, the remarkable intrepid freedom fighter from Trivandrum. G.G. Swell, Shillong, and Shamim from Srinagar. Even a simple research on their contributions to the debates will show that these independent MPs made a difference. Kriplani ji, of course, towers above them, having moved the first no-confidence motion against Nehru. But Shamim, who died at the unacceptable age of 41, was an exceptional orator, an independent MP from Srinagar. Exceptional orator, and he held the Lok Sabha in thrall whenever he spoke. Rahul Bajaj, on saying that fear ruled business today, was asked, how can you say that when you are yourself being so fearless and speaking like this? Rahul Bajaj can draw heart and draw a simile from Shamim. Once when Shamim spoke of elections in Kashmir having not been free and fair, another MP rose and asked him, Shamim Sahab, how can you say elections in Kashmir are rigged when you have got elected as an independent? Shamim's reply was very simple. Looking at the speaker, he said, Sir, if a plane crashed and one person escaped miraculously, does it mean the plane did not crash? Independent legislators are about individuality. There is also such a thing as the independence of legislators who belong to parties. Firoz Gandhi's individuality as a Congress MP is a permanent example. And I must here say that I laud and applaud the independence of 2 Congress MPs, Jairam Ramesh and Shashi Tharoor, who have had the courage to say that if a capital I and a capital F, something good is being done by this government today, we should have the freedom to say good thing has been done by this government. Similarly, I must also say that Pawan Verma's critique of the CAA and Maneka Gandhi's critique of the Hyderabad shootout reflect an independent spirit in a non-independent MP, and we must welcome that. Friends, the mega fact, however, is that individuality is out and uniformity is in. Non-conformity is out and conformity is in. Argument is out, demagoguery is in. And overarching these, tolerance is out and intolerance is in. If this was to be shown in physical terms, we could say brain is out, brawn is in, mind is out, muscle is in. The rise and the rise and the rise of two rival companies threaten Freedom and Sons Ltd with product competition. One can be called Freedom and Cons Limited, having mastered the art of spinning money, and the other can be called Freedom and Dons Limited, having mastered the art of bullying. Nobody knows more than Vohra Sahib what criminality in politics does, having headed a committee which has given an iconic report. Friends, through struggle was the Republic of India born. Through struggle does it live. And through striving, through alertness, and the courage to be able to differ and disagree against old and new methods of control, will it remain a republic. Freedom and Sons Limited has always run and will always run the risk of having its accounts called in question, its donors queried, its workers quizzed, its premises raided, and newspapers that have flown its banner interrogated, and the threat of takeover in so-called public interest dangled before it. This is nothing new. This is not, as the left liberal may imagine, a post-2014 phenomenon. When freedom was in the air, round the corner, so to say, a small drama was enacted around Freedom and Sons Limited, which bears brief narration. In the August of 1941, World War II was at its fieriest. The Luftwaffe had struck Moscow, taken 300,000 Soviet soldiers prisoner. Japan had occupied French Indochina and taken over Saigon, sending Roosevelt and Churchill to work on the Atlantic Charter. In India, the British Raj had to do its bit for the war effort. It opened a war fund, and public subscriptions to it were solicited. In theory, voluntary, they were fairly obligatory for those who came in contact with the establishment. At midpoint, while awarding a sentence of transportation for life to 4 out of 20 accused in a murder case, the additional sessions judge in Meerut said in court, as the Hindustan Times reporter present in the court reported in a dispatch to his paper, that the governor of the province and the chief justice of the Allahabad court had asked judicial officers to subscribe to the war funds. Upon this, lawyers for the accused were thrilled, and they promptly paid 200 rupees to the judge, who resumed reading out the rest of his order, acquitting all the other accused. The Hindustan Times carried its Meerut correspondence report, and a little later a comment as well, which said, if it is true that the new Chief Justice has issued a circular to judicial officers enjoining them to raise contributions, he has done a thing which will lower the prestige of the courts in the eyes of the people. The Chief Justice of the Allahabad Court caused a contempt writ to be served on the newspaper's editor and asked him, do you realize that disrespect has been shown to the office of the Chief Justice? The editor maintained that it was his public duty to report matters that seemed to him in the public interest, but admitted, I realize that I have been an unwitting instrument of showing disrespect, for which I am sorry. But saying sorry, as we know from recent legal case history, is not the same thing as offering an apology. The Chief Justice held that contempt has been committed and sentenced the reporter to 2 months and the editor to 1 month's imprisonment. The editor chose to go to jail with his reporter. The court had won its case, but the Hindustan Times had won the day. It had showed up the Raj as embodied in the court as being churlish, but more seriously as having ignored canons of judicial fairness and propriety, in that the Chief Justice was being both prosecutor and judge rolled into one. And even more seriously, it had shown the judiciary under the British Raj as being part of the fountain architecture of imperial hubris, colonial ego, and statist arrogance. Mahatma Gandhi took a close interest in the case, the jail-going editor being his own son. But he had told his editor's son, "Look, whatever be the merits of the case, and the merits seem to be with you, courtesy to the Chief Justice should not be overlooked." And this came from one who was going to oppose the Raj within months through the Quit India movement. The judiciary is like any human being, fallible and unpredictable. And Freedom and Sons Limited may not take the courts for granted any more than the peasant can take the monsoons for granted. They are great when they come, but we wait for them to come. The delay in the Supreme Court's pronouncing orders on Kashmir-related matters before it, especially habeas corpus matters, is perplexing. But one must say with relief and with pride that today, when the Supreme Court can, through separate concurring judgments, shine a distinct and delightful light on the individual's right to privacy, that today, 2019 is not 1941. Likewise, when the Supreme Court can respond independently and speedily to petitions seeking relief from piquant situations arising out of governors' decisions on government formation, 2019 is not 1941. Also, when the Supreme Court says that the RTI Act will apply to it, or that bail is the rule and jail the exception, 2019 is not 1941. But most tellingly, when the Chief Justice of India says in a public speech that revenge is not justice, and that if revenge becomes justice, justice loses its character, then not only is 2019 not 1941, but we can count ourselves blessed. There is no war now as there was in 1941. Thank God or goodness, whichever recipient of gratitude one may choose to offer our thanks to. But Hitler has a contemporary global avatar in the shape of terrorism, as sinister as that of the architect of gas chambers, but even more diabolical in its techno-savviness, its chilling unconcern for innocence, dying under its sway, its facelessness, namelessness, heartlessness, and it has havens in our vicinity. This has created an undeclared warlike situation in which each of us is called upon rightly and necessarily to be part of our republic's vigilance, its readiness to face terror, repulse, and end it. Here there is one paramount lesson that Freedom and Sons Limited can teach from its World War II experience, and it is this: that external or internal challenges to freedom cannot be met by undermining democratic rights, especially the right to free thought and expression, which are at the heart of democracy and are the soul of a republic. Friends, it is not as if these rights have come under controlling mechanisms only in the recent past. Historical fairness requires that we note that it was under the Prime Ministership of Jawaharlal Nehru that in 1953, Sheikh Abdullah's government was dismissed and he was locked up from premier to prisoner overnight and stayed in custody for 11 long years. Sire to son to grandson, the imprisoners have changed, the prisoners have remained the same. And it was under the Prime Ministership of Jawaharlal Nehru again that the democratically elected communist government of Kerala, led by EMS Namboodiripad, was sacked. No state government can afford to forget that first instance of the centre's rough handling of a state, for the mold, once cracked, repeats the mark in every subsequent casting. of Indira Gandhi's national emergency, with its wholesale arrests of opposition leaders, there is no need for me or for anyone to say anything. Its diabolism is patent and has been set down in the history of democracy's global infarctions. But no democracy can afford to forget or dare deny that her emergency has crafted a weapon for democracy's subversion and set a most dangerous precedent. The freedom struggle threw off fear. The national emergency 75-77 brought it back. Not for nothing was the movement against the emergency described as a second struggle for freedom. But fear was only curbed, it was not exorcised. The state had tasted the ink that approves an unconstitutional measure. We have reached a stage in our political life when those of us who have valued the legacy of the freedom struggle, cherished the great document called the Constitution of India and our national emblems, will have to speak with caveats and qualifications. We will have to say the original Ambedkar's Constitution of India, the unamended Citizenship Act, the Puranawala Indian passport, the former state of Jammu and Kashmir. Fear is a fever, and fever a symptom, not the disease. Our freedom is fevered at present with three root causes that I have mentioned: religious bigotry, the tyranny of wealth, and the play of power. None of these are new, but their concerted action, their combined assault on the enterprises of freedom, especially the freedom of speech and communication, coming from an ideological hinterland, that is new. Kashmir, for instance, has known its political leaders to be jailed, but with life in Kashmir as such unaffected, not as it is now. Friends, there is no point bemoaning these three if we are not going to face each stakeholder in Freedom and Sons, each in her own, his own way, these three, but always with zero violence. I will conclude with two fear-related thoughts. The first is directed at ourselves, and it should make us ponder and reflect, and I say this with all seriousness and with introspection. It is this, simply put: those who fear fear should know that somewhere in ourselves, somewhere in our withins, we are actually fearing not society's intolerance, not the state's power, but we are fearing our own vulnerabilities. And as long as our own weaknesses and vulnerabilities remain unacknowledged and unattended, fear will remain. We value and we respect those who are honest about their vulnerabilities, who are willing to take responsibilities for them and shed their office, and where need be to make amends. Such persons, they expel fear. Fearlessness does not require a past that is free from weakness. It requires a readiness to face the past. The second thought about fear is directed at the sources of fear. And it should make us feel somewhat reassured, though complacency would be wrong, unwise. Those who seem pleased with themselves at being feared are in reality themselves rather frightened beings. They know it, though they do not show it. They are frightened of losing their privilege of frightening others, frightened of losing the propensity to frighten, frightened of the Rast Goftar, the truth teller, because they are afraid, in short, of the truth. The removal of safeguards from the Data Protection Bill reflects that insecurity. This can turn us, as Justice Shri Krishna has warned, into an Orwellian state. The bill is now with the Joint Select Committee, and one ardently hopes that the expansive exemptions from it, which seem to be at variance with the Supreme Court's orders on the right to privacy, will be removed, and if not removed, will be disallowed. There is a final fear-related thought to be borne in mind. Fear being, as I said, a fever, it assails but the one who is fevered and those concerned for her or him. those many and many more who are not assailed by the fever of fear. And this is very important. Those who are not afraid and who cannot relate to the febrile condition, who cannot understand the delirium of those patients, those are many. There are many, many more than we imagine. Many, many, many more than the many who are gathered here today. Those who ask rightly and earnestly why are being made to fear should also ask, should also wonder, why are so many not in fear? जो डरे हुए नहीं हैं, वे क्यों डरे हुए नहीं हैं? जिनके लिए सब ठीक ठीक है, जिनके लिए बिजनेस एज यूजुअल है, उनके लिए ऐसा क्यों है? Are we missing out on something? Is the left liberal aware? Are we aware why the right illiberal is what he is? What makes so many receptive to bias? What makes so many receptive to hate? Free speech is valuable because being unfettered, it is frank. But free speech has an obligation to be aware of the whole ground, the full reality in all its aspects, if only to be able to meet it. Disdain of so-called middle-class opinion by the so-called intelligentsia is not arrogant, it is just self-defeating, as is disdain of religion by the so-called secular. Gandhi did not make that mistake. We do not know the people in whose name we speak, he said. We do not know the people in whose name we speak, and they do not know us. Friends, the other day, in New Delhi's Nizamuddin area, I saw a cycle rickshaw plying a young mother in a bright sari and a brighter bindi, with two children. The slightly older one was sitting beside the mother, the younger one was on the mother's lap. And as the rickshaw turned, the little one slipped down from the mother's loose clasp and fell onto the road. The rickshaw puller, an old bearded man, stopped the vehicle at once and bending down, picked up the child and restored it to the mother. बच्चे को कोई चोट तो नहीं लगी? I asked him. He was bearded, old. He said, हुजूर, चोट तो लगी है, कैसे नहीं लगती, लेकिन इंशाल्लाह बच्चा ठीक हो जाएगा. That was when the respective religions of the rickshaw sawar and the rickshaw wala dawned on me. With unnamed fears beating me, I said silently, bless you all. Inshallah, Bhagwan kare, चोट तो लगी है, लेकिन सब ठीक हो जाएगा. हिंद की संतान हिंद को और हिंद को हिंद की संतान बचाएगी. In my hallucinated conversation with Ramu, I mentioned in my defense of the title of this lecture, Freedom and Sons Limited, Lord Byron's famous lines on Freedom's Sons. Predictably, Ramu was unimpressed. Byron was writing about the Greek War of Independence in the 19th century, and you are neither Byron nor Greek. But when I explained to him that I mean by sons basically us, legatees of the freedom that was won decades ago, and of the constitution that came with it, he softened and said, I am a student of philosophy, and so I'm questioning things all the time. You are a student of literature, you're quoting things all the time. So all right, recite those lines to me. And I did, and they are these. For freedom's battle once begun, bequeathed from bleeding sire to son, though baffled oft, is ever won. Very well, Ramu said. Very well then, let your title be. And raising an imaginary glass, he said softly, so, Gopu, to Mushir.
On this solemn occasion, may I sincerely thank all esteemed members of the civil society, which include our former Vice President, Mr. Hamid Ansari, who have been with us today to make this session a success. We particularly express our gratitude to Mr. Gopakrishna Gandhi and Mr. N. Vohra for being with us today. Mr. Gandhi's invigorating address will certainly remain a source of inspiration for all of us, for all those who want to make India a better place to live in. I put on record sincerest thanks to the India International Center, especially to Mr. Vohra and Madam Tochang, popularly known as Tete, I perhaps not pronounced it correctly, for rendering all possible assistance in organizing this first Mushirul Hasan Memorial Lecture. But as with the publication of the book, this program too would not have been possible without the encouragement and support we received from Zoya and also from Monica Chopra. Thank you, Zoya and Monica. I do believe and I emphasize that Mushir would not have been Mushir as we found him without Zoya by his side. And I can testify from my own experience how during the last days of Mushir, Zoya demonstrated a passionate attachment and love for a life companion in an exceptional example of conjugality, which is becoming rare in our troubled days. Distinguished members of the House, delivering the 6th Ambedkar lecture at the Ambedkar University, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of which is present here, Gopakrishna Gandhi had aptly reminded us, and I quote, "Hero worship anoints the worshipper rather than the worshipped," unquote. In that spirit, may I submit that perhaps the best way to remember Mushir is to inculcate the values of nation building that he stood for. The value for democracy, the value for liberalism, the value for secularism, and the value for nationalist conscience. Mushir stood for imparting an education which for Mahatma Gandhi would ensure, I quote, "a proper and harmonious combination of body, heart and soul," unquote, which in the words of Noam Chomsky would promote enlightenment, which for Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, I quote, "does not merely give us information, but makes our life in harmony with all existence," unquote, and which for Vivekananda would ensure, I quote, "the expression of perfection in man," unquote. In rescuing Jamia, Mushir had demonstrated how our universities could emerge as the centers of critical thought and as the centers for tolerance. And if we can resolve to continue this process, we would be surely be paying the fittest tribute to Mushir. And I'm sure we'll be able to do this despite all the hurdles that come in our way. Thank you very much indeed.